There is a state of mind that does not chase validation. It never raises its voice to seize control, nor does it scramble to prove its worth. It simply exists, calm, clear, and immovable. When it enters a room, chaos loses its grip. People pause. Conversations shift. Because deep down, we all recognize something unnerving in its presence. This is a mind that cannot be swayed. Not by praise, not by threats, not even by love. It sees through the noise without reacting to it. It listens without being pulled into the current. And in its profound stillness, others begin to unravel. Not because it seeks to dominate, but because it simply refuses to be disturbed. Most people spend their lives desperate to be understood. The Stoic path, however, teaches something different. Understand yourself so deeply that no misunderstanding can touch you. Train your thoughts as a warrior sharpens his blade, not to harm, but to hold your own peace when the world has lost its own. If you are someone who values clarity over chaos, depth over distraction, and inner power over outward noise, then consider this a quiet vow to yourself. To walk the path of discipline, self-mastery, and unshakable peace. Most people are not broken. They are merely scattered. Their minds leap from one desire to the next like a flame flickering in the wind, never steady, never still. One day, they chase tranquility as if it were the answer to all their restlessness. The next, they crave attention, hoping it will soothe the emptiness left behind. Then comes the guilt, followed by shame, and the desperate swing back toward ambition, believing that this time it will grant them meaning. But by nightfall, they are apologizing for wanting too much, resenting themselves for not wanting enough, and wondering why life feels like it's pulling them in 1,000 directions at once. It is not that they lack capability, they lack clarity. And the truth is, clarity is far rarer than intelligence. Intelligence fills books, but clarity builds empires. The internal kind, the kind no one can see but everyone feels when you enter a room. It is a presence that needs no announcement. It moves with quiet, focused direction. This is the beginning of a ruthless mind. Not ruthless in its cruelty, but in its discipline, in its deliberate subtraction, in choosing purpose over every distraction that clutters it. But clarity does not arrive like a revelation from the sky. It isn't found in a quote on your wall or a motivational video. It is forged in the fire of discomfort. It is born in those quiet moments when you finally ask the question most people avoid their entire lives. What do I actually want? Not what sounds noble, not what earns applause, not what looks good on paper, but what burns quietly inside me when everything else goes silent. Clarity begins there. Not in the answers, but in the willingness to ask the uncomfortable questions. What do I truly want beyond comfort? Who must I become to deserve it? And what am I willing to release to stop being pulled apart? These questions cut deep because they threaten the identities we have built for acceptance. They do not flatter the ego, they expose it. Most people will look away, but the few who don't, who stare down the contradictions of their own lives, begin to feel a shift, a stillness, a sense of direction that requires no external validation. Once you know what you serve, the rest of the world begins to quiet down. You are no longer driven by opinion, insult, or praise. You are no longer chasing applause or running from criticism. You are simply moving, one decision at a time, toward something real. Seneca once wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." This is why most people feel so exhausted. It's not because they are failing, it's because they are sailing without a map, carried by whatever gust of attention, fear, or doubt hits them next. A ruthless mind is not reactive. It is anchored. While others are swayed by moods and moments, you remain rooted in something far deeper. That root is clarity. Not the kind that needs constant reaffirmation, but the kind that feels like a vow. You begin to say no, not out of anger, but out of alignment. You stop explaining yourself, not because you are arrogant, but because your energy has become intentional. You let people misunderstand you, if they must, because you are no longer performing for their approval. Carl Jung spoke of the unlived life that exists within us all, the life we avoid because it threatens the identity we've built. When you seek clarity, that unlived life begins to speak. If you listen, it will lead you to something rare, a sense of direction so strong that distractions feel like static. You stop needing to prove your worth and instead begin to build it, quietly, brick by brick. Clarity doesn't mean you won't feel lost sometimes, but even in confusion, you will have something most do not: an orientation. You may take detours, but you will not forget your destination. You may be misunderstood, but you will not misplace your values. This is what separates those who drift from those who lead, not titles or status, but the internal compass that holds steady when the storm hits. When your mind is no longer a battlefield of conflicting desires, it becomes a weapon of focus, and that is what terrifies people. Not because you are cold, but because you are calm in a world that feeds on chaos. You do not flinch when provoked. You do not chase when ignored. You do not crumble when they withdraw their approval. Why? Because clarity has made you independent of it all. You no longer seek direction in their reactions. You have already chosen your path. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." Clarity is that freedom. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it removes dependency. You stop waiting for signs. You become the sign. You stop asking for permission. You start acting from principle. And people will notice. They won't always understand it, but they will feel it: the stillness, the self-containment, the refusal to be rushed or flattered into decisions that do not serve your vision. Here is the part most never realize. Clarity is not just about direction. It's about the conservation of your life force. When you know where you are going, you don't waste energy convincing others to walk with you. You don't beg to be seen. You walk alone, if you must. And in doing so, you become visible in a way that noise never could be. So if your mind has felt foggy, scattered, or easily pulled, ask yourself, what must I stop pretending I don't want? Not what is expected of me, but what has been calling to me, quietly, for years. Let that become your compass. Let clarity become the ground you stand on when everything else shakes. Because once you know where you are going, distraction loses its power, guilt becomes irrelevant, and the noise simply fades into the background. You stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop chasing. You simply move, with a clarity so sharp the world begins to adjust to you. People do not fear your anger. They do not fear your love. They fear not being able to predict which one you will offer. They fear what they cannot read, because when someone cannot place your emotions, they cannot prepare for your next move, and that kind of uncertainty unravels their sense of control. Most people are walking instruction manuals, easy to decode, easy to manipulate. Praise them, and they melt. Criticize them, and they collapse. Push the right button, and you know exactly what reaction you will get. But the moment you stop reacting on cue, everything changes. Their script breaks, their rhythm stumbles, because emotional stillness is not passive. It is power with the volume turned all the way down. Stillness is profoundly misunderstood. Some mistake it for coldness, others for indifference. But true stillness, the kind that emanates from an inner fortress, is not about shutting down. It is about choosing when and how you express what you feel. The ruthless mind feels everything: rage that burns, joy that lifts, pain that cuts deep. But it never lets those feelings escape recklessly. It does not broadcast its vulnerability or parade its excitement, because once the world sees your triggers, it learns how to pull them. There is a reason emotional predictability is so often exploited. If others can read you like a book, they will start writing chapters in your life that do not belong there. A shift in your tone, a tension in your shoulders. Every visible cue becomes a lever they can pull. Slowly, you stop acting from clarity and start reacting from pressure. But the moment you become unreadable, when your calm becomes consistent and your silence becomes your standard, they no longer know where to press. And that is when your real power emerges. As Epictetus taught, it is not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. The Stoic knows that emotion is not the enemy. Untrained emotion is. Once your feelings take the lead, your reason follows like a shadow. You can feel everything and still be ruled by nothing. This is what separates strength from sensitivity. One becomes your compass, the other your cage. But how do you hold stillness when every fiber of your being is screaming to respond? This is where discipline enters. You practice emotional stillness the way an archer practices their aim, not by ignoring the target, but by calming the hand that draws the bow. You learn to breathe before you speak. You learn to pause before you react. You learn to observe your emotions like waves on the ocean, not to drown in them, but to understand their movement. The goal is not to become empty, but to become sovereign over yourself. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people are led by emotional impulses they have never examined. They believe they are being authentic, but they are simply being reactive. Stillness is not suppression, it is awareness. It is looking at the storm within and saying, "I see you, but you do not steer this ship today." It is not that you don't care, it is that you care enough to protect your response from being wasted. There is a hidden advantage to this stillness. It forces others to reveal themselves. When you do not react, when you do not flinch or over-explain, people begin to overcompensate. They talk more, they reveal more. They try harder to get a rise out of you, and in doing so they expose their own motivations. Your stillness becomes a mirror reflecting their insecurity. And you? You remain quiet. You learn. You wait. Think of the last time someone said something designed to provoke you. Perhaps they questioned your worth or dismissed your efforts, expecting you to defend yourself. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you offer silence instead of justification? They lean in, they scramble, because the pressure has shifted. They are no longer sure what you are thinking, and in their uncertainty, their control dissolves. Stillness is not about winning arguments. It is about refusing to play games that cost you your peace. When you do not give away your emotional state, you conserve your energy. You protect your center. In a world that is always trying to pull you off balance, that stillness becomes sacred. It becomes your weapon, not to attack, but to outlast. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That is the root of emotional stillness. Knowing that no matter what chaos surrounds you, your reaction is still yours to own. You can be misunderstood and remain grounded. You can be criticized and stay composed. Because emotional stillness is not weakness, it is containment. And that makes people uneasy. They cannot manipulate what they cannot measure. People will call you distant. Some will say you have changed. Let them talk. You are not cold. You are conscious. You are not disconnected. You are deliberate. And the more you train yourself to sit with discomfort without expressing it recklessly, the more control you gain, not just over their perception, but over your life. A calm face in a heated moment becomes a symbol. A person who refuses to be provoked becomes magnetic. The silence you hold becomes louder than their noise. In that space, you begin to control the energy of a room without raising your voice, without explaining your stance, without chasing understanding. Eventually, people learn. Not because you preached, but because you practiced. They learn that your peace is not for sale, that your emotions are not available on command, that your boundaries do not shake under pressure. And they begin to adjust, not to your anger, not to your approval, but to your consistency. This is how emotional stillness becomes a weapon. Not to hurt, but to protect. Not to intimidate, but to insulate. In a noisy world, your silence becomes sharp. In a reactive world, your calm becomes rare. And when people cannot decode you, they become cautious. That caution is power. Quiet power. Stoic power. Let your stillness do the work. Let your silence carry the weight. Because the strongest move you will ever make is not reacting, when you have been trained your whole life to do just that. You do not need to raise your voice to make an impact. You do not need to interrupt, to argue, or to prove you are right. Real influence, the kind that bends the energy of a room, comes from noticing what others miss. Most people believe power lies in what you say, but true power often lies in what you see and choose not to say. Because when you see clearly, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You simply understand what moves them, and that knowledge alone is leverage. Observation is not passive. It is the most underestimated form of control. While others rush to speak, to defend, to be heard, the ruthless mind listens. Not just to the words, but to the patterns, the pauses, the contradictions. You listen for what someone repeats too often, and for what they never mention at all. You notice how their voice shifts when a certain name is brought up. You catch the flash of tension behind a forced smile, the moment their eyes drop when a topic hits too close. These are not small things. They are signals, and people are constantly leaking them. But to notice, you must slow down. That is hard for most, because slowing down means surrendering the urge to respond, the need to be interesting, the desire to be right. It means placing your attention fully on another person, not to impress them, but to understand them. The way a sculptor studies a block of marble before the first strike, not with impatience, but with curiosity. This is the difference between someone who speaks to be noticed and someone who sees to know. Most people live on the surface. They react to tone, to compliments, to insults, never asking why that person said what they did. But a trained observer asks, what are they trying to hide? What are they defending? What are they chasing? Because behind every reaction is a belief, and behind every story is a wound. When you can see the shape of someone's pain without them ever saying a word, you hold more power than they will ever admit. Carl Jung observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But if you enter that meeting unaware, reacting emotionally, you miss the transformation. You lose the data. You reveal too much and learn too little. The Stoics spoke not only of mastering emotion, but of mastering perception, of understanding nature in all its forms, including human nature. What drives people? What scares them? What masks do they wear to survive? Here is the part no one tells you. People reveal the most when they think you are not looking. When your energy is quiet and your presence is steady, they begin to perform. That is when the truth emerges, not through confession, but through contradiction. A subtle tremble when challenged, a moment of over-explaining, a quick deflection followed by forced laughter. These are not accidents. They are cracks in the facade. And once you have seen them, you do not need to confront or expose. You simply calibrate. You adjust your approach. You speak to the truth beneath the surface, not the performance on top of it. This is not manipulation. It is alignment. You stop wasting words where they won't be received. You stop offering trust where it won't be returned. You move with quiet, strategic precision. Observation is also protection. It keeps you from walking into battles that are not worth fighting, from forming alliances with those who wear sincerity like a costume. Most people fall for appearances. Well-practiced charm, timed generosity, the right words. But a still mind sees through it. It watches. It waits. It notices how people speak of others when they are not in the room, how they handle discomfort, whether they ask questions or just wait for their turn to talk. There is power in intentional silence, the kind that lets someone fill the space while you study them. Let them over-explain. Let them try too hard. The more they speak, the more they reveal. And the less you say, the more they begin to guess what you are thinking. That guessing becomes their discomfort. That silence becomes your leverage. As Seneca wrote, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. We assume danger where there is none, and miss the real threat standing right in front of us because we are too busy reacting, projecting, and assuming. But the ruthless mind observes without judgment. It takes in data, not drama. It does not rush to a conclusion. It lets people reveal themselves over time, and they always do. Once you become a person who observes instead of reacts, you see things others miss entirely. You realize that someone's bragging is just insecurity in disguise, that another's silence is not confidence, but fear, that someone's warmth might be genuine, or it might be rehearsed, and instead of confronting it, you simply store the information. You let time do its work, because power isn't always in the response. It is in the restraint. Eventually, people begin to feel it, the way you look at them and they cannot tell what you are thinking, the way you speak less but understand more, the way you do not fall for flattery or rise to an insult. They begin to notice that their usual tricks do not work on you. And that realization, however subtle, shifts the entire dynamic. You do not have to dominate conversations or be the loudest in the room. You just have to be the one who sees clearly. And once you are, the game changes. People do not perform the same when they feel they are truly seen. The mask of performance falls away. They don't lie as easily. They don't strive as hard to impress. Because on some intuitive level, they sense the difference. They know you are not just hearing their words, you are reading their silence. And so, when the moment comes to act, you do not strike blindly. You move with a quiet purpose. You speak only when necessary, and when you do, your words land with greater weight, not because they are louder, but because they are informed. Every sentence is shaped by what you have observed in the quiet moments. Every move is made from a place of unshakable clarity. You did not rush to play the game. You studied the board. And now you make your move. There is a reason guilt is the most effective instrument of control. Not force, not fear, but guilt. It does not raise its voice. It does not lock you in a room. It whispers. It cloaks itself in the language of kindness. It arrives sounding like your conscience, but moves like a chain. Don't be cruel. Don't make them feel bad. Just give them one more chance. It sounds noble, until you realize you are bleeding for people who would never offer you a bandage. So you give again. You stay quiet again. You bend just a little further. And with every concession, you shrink. Most people do not know the origin of their guilt. It was a seed planted in childhood, watered by repetition, and cultivated by relationships that praised compliance and punished resistance. They learned that saying no made them selfish, that walking away made them heartless, that upholding a boundary meant they were the problem. And so they stopped choosing for themselves, not from a lack of clarity, but from a fear of how others might feel. They traded their truth for a fragile harmony. But what kind of peace is it that demands your silence? Guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it is a leash designed to make you sit quietly within the confines of someone else's comfort zone. The Stoics taught that emotions must be examined before they are obeyed, that clarity is found not in surrendering to a feeling, but in questioning its source. So when guilt rises, pause. Ask yourself, is this feeling rooted in my own values, or is it a tool being used to manipulate my behavior? For there is a vast difference between a conscience and a cage. Carl Jung once observed that nothing has a stronger influence on a child than the unlived life of the parent. Many were raised not just by rules, but by a guilt passed down like a family heirloom, not because their parents were cruel, but because they themselves were never taught a better way. Guilt became the language of love, discipline, and control. And that voice remained in your head long after theirs fell silent. You cannot create authentic peace by constantly sacrificing yourself to avoid discomfort. That is not peace. It is people-pleasing dressed in the robes of morality. And morality without freedom is merely obedience. True power begins the moment you stop apologizing for your boundaries. When you cease explaining why you are unavailable to be drained. When you stop offering more of yourself simply to keep the room calm. Because sometimes the room needs to feel the discomfort of your truth, not the illusion of your agreement. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming honest. If someone is hurt by your boundary, it does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the relationship was built on your absence of one. And that is a foundation that needs to shift. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of self-respect. If keeping the peace requires your constant self-abandonment, it is not peace at all. It is emotional servitude. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But how can you be free if you are ruled by the fear of being disliked? How can you be strong if every decision is filtered through another's expectations? Guilt makes cowards of the kind-hearted. It turns strength into silence and generosity into exhaustion. The only way to break free is to practice disappointing those who benefit from your compliance. And you will disappoint them. Let that be known. They will call you selfish, cold, distant. They will say you have changed, and they will be right. You have. You have learned to ask better questions. You have learned to stand centered in your own life, and in doing so, you have made space for something rare. Clarity that does not waver under the weight of guilt. It will not feel natural at first. The first few times you say no, your voice may shake. You might feel the echo of old training whispering that you are being cruel. But hold the line. Because every time you choose what is right over what is easy, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Those who love you without condition will adjust. They may not like it at first, but they will come to respect it. And the ones who fall away? That was their choice, not your betrayal. As you become clearer, as guilt loosens its grip, you will notice how much quieter life becomes. Not because people stop asking, but because you no longer feel obligated to answer. You move with integrity. You choose with intention. and that is far more honest than any smile forced by guilt. There is a strength that comes from finally saying, "I will not carry what is not mine." The emotional weight, the shame, the endless task of fixing what others continue to break, you set it down. Not to punish, but to protect. Not because you have stopped caring, but because you have finally started caring for yourself. And from that place, you do not give less, you give better. You give from a place of fullness, not from a place of fear. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. What if we applied that same standard to guilt? If it is not rooted in your values, do not obey it. If it does not point to real harm you have caused, do not carry it. Guilt has its place, as an alarm that signals a misalignment with your principles, but its place is not at the helm of your life, enslaving you to false obligations. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. You stop flinching when someone says, "You've changed." You stop defending every decision that doesn't please the crowd. You stop feeling responsible for every emotion in the room. And then something beautiful happens. You grow, not just in confidence, but in presence. People begin to feel your center. They sense that you no longer require their approval to make a move. And that calm, quiet conviction shifts the atmosphere in ways your old compliance never could. So if guilt still pulls at you, pause. Ask if it belongs to you. Ask if it is earned. And if it is not, let it pass like a wave. You are not obligated to drown in waters that are not your own. You are not selfish for choosing peace over performance. You are not cruel for wanting space from that which drains you. The moment guilt stops steering your choices, something else takes its place. Clarity, integrity, and the kind of peace that doesn't depend on keeping others comfortable. A peace that, finally, includes you. The most unsettling person in any room is not the loudest. It is the one who doesn't need anyone else to be there. This is not born of arrogance or detachment, but from having built a world inside themselves that does not collapse when others walk away. That is what makes people nervous. We live in a culture that thrives on emotional dependency, one that teaches us to equate love with approval and worth with applause. But what happens when you no longer need any of it to feel whole? Most people are in a constant state of managing the image they believe others want to see. They chase closeness not because they are ready for it, but because solitude terrifies them. They seek reassurance as a substitute for self-trust. They collapse in the face of being misunderstood, as if another's confusion could alter the truth of who they are. But once you begin to build from the inside out, that desperation fades, and something new takes its place. Containment. Self-containment is not isolation. It is internal abundance. It means you have stopped handing people the power to decide how you feel about yourself. You do not chase text messages to confirm you are loved. You do not beg for explanations to move on. You do not fall apart when someone pulls away, because you were never leaning on them for balance in the first place. You have developed your own gravity. And now, people either orbit with respect, or they drift away. As the Stoics taught, true freedom lies in wanting nothing, expecting nothing, and controlling only oneself. It sounds cold at first, but it is the warmest form of liberation. The moment you stop expecting others to complete you, you finally begin to meet yourself in full. There is a line from Marcus Aurelius that cuts to the bone. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. That is the aim, to make your soul a place you can inhabit, without needing someone else to decorate it. We have been conditioned to believe that needing others is proof of being human, And while connection is vital, dependency is another story entirely. When your sense of self rises and falls with someone else's attention, you are not in love, you are in captivity. Self-containment is the ability to share a space with someone without shrinking into them. It is walking away from a conversation without replaying it 1,000 times, wondering if you should have smiled more or explained yourself better. It means you live by your own rhythm, not by their reactions. Jung noted that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that are important to you. But when you are self-contained, your worth does not shatter in the silence. You find peace even when no one is there to hear your thoughts. You find power in restraint, not as suppression, but as sovereignty. You do not have to say everything, explain everything, or feel everything out loud. You simply know. And that quiet knowing becomes a foundation no one else can shake. People will test it. They will pull back to see if you will chase. They will question you to see if you will bend. They will offer approval to see if you still crave it. But when none of it moves you, when you remain still, grounded, and present, they begin to sense that you are different, not unreachable, but unreachable through manipulation. And that unnerves them because their usual scripts no longer work. This is not about being unaffected. It is about being unshakable. You still feel. You still care. But you do not leak your power. You do not hand over your peace for the sake of being understood. You do not rearrange your values to stay close to someone who does not value you. You learn to say, "This is who I am, and I will not collapse myself to make you comfortable." That clarity will either draw people in deeper or send them away. And either way, you remain whole. There is something rare about a person who walks into a room already full, who does not enter a relationship hoping to be saved, who can sit with their own thoughts long enough to make decisions from alignment, not from fear. That kind of presence is felt. It is not showy or loud, but it lingers, because people are accustomed to being needed. Not many are ready to be chosen. Seneca advised, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." But if you are constantly trying to prove yourself to be accepted, you are not being improved. You are being emptied. The person who truly respects your self-containment will not be intimidated by it. They will admire it. They will meet you with their own center, not their chaos. And together, a rare connection becomes possible, one without control. To get there, you must practice. You must sit in the discomfort of not replying to every accusation. You must hold your ground when someone insists you have changed. You must stop chasing conversations that never respected your voice to begin with. And in that stillness, you will feel it, the return of your power, the slow, steady shift from neediness to presence, from performance to peace. There will be moments when the old patterns whisper, when the urge to explain, to chase, to seek reassurance creeps in. But every time you choose to stay anchored, to breathe through the pull, you reinforce a profound truth. Your peace is not negotiable. Your self-worth is not outsourced. And your love, when given, is not a plea. It is a gift. Freely offered, never begged for. So let others come and go. Let their opinions rise and fall like the tide. You have built something within that does not wash away so easily. And that, more than being liked, validated, or even understood, is what sets you apart. You are not hard to love. You are simply no longer easy to manipulate. And once you reach that place of quiet strength, you will not trade it again. Not for company, not for comfort, not for anyone who confuses access with entitlement. Because the most powerful thing you can become is someone who no longer needs to be held together by anyone else. You already are. Real power never introduces itself. It does not walk into a room and declare its presence. It does not announce its victories or demand recognition. It moves quietly. It arrives without noise, and yet everyone feels it, not because of what is said, but because of what has been consistently done. That is the weight of discipline. That is the kind of influence that lingers long after you have left the room. People often try to build power through image, through status, through polished words and relentless self-promotion. But image fades. Discipline remains. When your actions align with your principles, day after day, without need for applause, something stronger than an impression is formed. A reputation. And the strongest reputations are not spoken. They are built. They are carved into the silence you hold, the boundaries you protect, and the reactions you refuse to give away. It begins with the small decisions. You walk away from disrespect without theatrics, not because you are weak, but because your dignity is no longer a bargaining chip. You uphold your boundaries without launching into lengthy explanations. You do not negotiate your worth just to keep the peace. Each of these moments is a thread, and together they weave something solid, an identity that speaks before you do. As Jung said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Most people forget this. They confuse noise with influence. But the mind that leads with quiet consistency will always speak louder. When you act with integrity, especially when no one is watching, you train the world how to perceive you. You teach people that your silence is not emptiness, but calculation. That your boundaries are not walls, but signals. That your distance is not anger, but discernment. The beauty of this kind of presence is that it requires no maintenance. It does not demand you correct every misconception or defend every decision. The people who understand, understand. The rest can guess. And that guessing creates a space most are not comfortable with. It forces them to sit with the version of you they cannot control. The more they try to fill the gaps with their assumptions, the more they reveal about themselves, not you. A reputation rooted in action does something remarkable. It enters rooms before you do. It precedes your name. It creates gravity without effort. Someone hears you are coming, and they adjust. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. They have heard how you carry yourself, how you refuse to overreact, how you do not engage in gossip. They understand that with you, silence is not absence. It is a message. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That is how you build a reputation. Not by chasing validation, but by becoming so aligned with your values that your very presence makes a statement your mouth never needs to form. You become known not by your opinions, but by your patterns. Not by your promises, but by your posture when things go wrong. And people will talk. Let them. Let them invent reasons for your silence. Let them speculate on why you stopped responding, why you no longer attend, why you moved without announcement. Every question they ask about you is energy spent trying to decode your self-control. That is the leverage, because when your name carries the weight of discipline, your absence becomes just as powerful as your presence. We live in a world that over-explains, that constantly seeks to clarify, justify, and protect every move. But a strong reputation is protected not by defending it, but by living it, quietly, repeatedly, without compromise. And that is where most people fall short. They try to control the narrative through conversation, but the narrative is best shaped through consistency, through the ability to walk away without making a scene and the power to remain still when provoked. Seneca wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." Some situations do not need your voice. They need your absence. Some people do not deserve your attention. They deserve your indifference. Every time you choose not to engage with noise, you reinforce the weight of your silence. not as punishment, but as protection. Not to hurt others, but to guard what you have built. Eventually, people stop testing you, not because you won an argument, but because you stopped showing up to play the game. They begin to associate your presence with calm, clarity, and consequence. They think twice before dragging you into nonsense, because they know you will not break character to match their chaos. And when people learn they cannot get a rise out of you, they stop trying to pull you down. This does not mean you become untouchable. It means you have become principled. And in a world where everyone wants to be liked, seen, and heard, being principled stands out. You do not have to dominate conversations or post your every move. You simply become known for how you carry yourself. And that reputation travels further than any explanation ever could. Let your name mean something, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it in silence. Through choices made with discipline, through boundaries kept without theatrics, through exits made without warning or revenge. That kind of reputation becomes armor, not because you are hiding, but because it reflects, without a single word, who you have become. So let people wonder why you did not show up. Let them ask why you did not respond. Let them feel your absence and try to make sense of it. While they talk, you build. While they guess, you grow. While they debate your character continues to speak in places your voice will never need to reach. Because in the end, the most powerful statements are not spoken. They are lived. And a reputation built on stillness, restraint, and unwavering discipline is not just remembered. It is respected. In every interaction, a frame is set. One person defines its borders, and the other moves within them. This frame dictates what is important, who must defend their position, and whose voice holds authority. And all too often, we surrender this power, oblivious to the fact that it was ever ours to wield. We leap to answer questions designed to ensnare us. We explain and over-explain. We defend, correct, and react. And in that very moment, we have already lost our center. The one who controls the frame has no need to raise their voice, no need to argue. They don't even need to win the conversation, for they have already chosen what the conversation is about. This is where true leverage resides, not in domination, but in direction. It is a subtle, quiet force, but once you understand it, everything shifts. We are conditioned to believe that self-defense is a sign of strength, that we must prove our goodness, our intentions, our very right to speak. But the moment someone pulls you into a frame built on accusation, gossip, or emotional chaos, and you respond from within it, you have accepted the rules of a game you did not design. You might win the argument, but you will lose your power, because strength is not reactive. It is directive. Carl Jung once observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And so often, their words, especially the baited ones, have little to do with you, and everything to do with their own inner turmoil. They provoke to pull you off balance, to test your alignment, to make you dance inside a frame that validates their narrative. But when you refuse, when you stand still and allow their assumptions to fall flat, control returns to you. Not as dominance, but as composure. Stoicism teaches us to guard our inner world like a fortress. As Epictetus reminded us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your own mind is complicit in the provocation. You are not responsible for what they say, but you are entirely responsible for whether you hand them your energy, for whether you allow their frame to become your reality. When you stop doing that, when you choose what deserves your attention and what does not, you cease to be a puppet on their strings. This is not a call for silence in the face of injustice. It is a call for discernment. It means recognizing when an argument is a trap, when a question is bait, and when a conversation is simply noise. Some things do not deserve your words. Some people do not deserve your explanation. And when you can sit in that silence, not from a place of avoidance, but from a place of power, others begin to notice. They begin to second-guess themselves, because you did not react as they expected. Let them question your motives. You do not defend, you live. Let them lie about your actions. You do not rush to correct the record. You remain in your integrity, because the truth does not need to be rescued. It only needs consistency. You know who you are. And when that knowing becomes unshakable, the need to control perception dissolves. What matters is not what they think, but who you become by refusing to entertain their distractions. There is a quiet strength in redirection. You need not argue your value. You can shift the conversation back to principles, to clarity, or even into silence. Sometimes the most powerful move is not to prove someone wrong, but to refuse to participate in their confusion. When they insult, you offer a faint smile. When they accuse, you ask, "What about that matters to you?" Not to provoke, but to pivot. Not to outwit, but to reset the frame. Marcus Aurelius understood this profoundly. You always own the option of having no opinion. This is a power most people overlook. You do not have to join every conflict. You do not have to explain your every move. You do not have to react simply because a reaction is demanded. When you choose silence over defense, redirection over reaction, you demonstrate that you are grounded in something deeper than their approval. And when you do this consistently, something remarkable happens. People begin to adapt to your frame. They speak more carefully around you. They stop testing you in petty ways. They begin to respect what they cannot predict. Because unpredictability, when rooted in principle, creates a kind of reverence. They don't know what will trigger you, because nothing trivial does. And that changes the entire dynamic. There is no need for aggression. You are not trying to overpower anyone. You are simply refusing to be pulled. You are choosing which battles are real. And when you disengage from the false ones, the true ones become clearer. Your energy sharpens. Your presence quiets the noise. You are no longer proving anything. You are simply being, with enough consistency that the room adjusts. Not because you force it, but because you frame it. Yes, some may call you distant. They may label you arrogant. Let them. Those are merely words thrown by people who have lost their grip on your emotions. They used to push and watch you fall. Now, they push, and you stand still. That stillness speaks. It recalibrates the space. And that is frame control. You command it not by dominating, but by choosing what you respond to, what you allow into your emotional field, what narrative you are living by. The answers become your compass, and they carry far more weight than your defenses ever could. Your calm becomes a boundary. Your silence becomes a mirror. And in that reflection, people are forced to see themselves, because you are no longer giving them a distorted version of you to fight with. So the next time you are pulled into someone's drama, their story, their emotional chaos, pause. Not everything deserves your voice. Not every frame deserves your presence. Protect your energy by deciding what you will carry. And remember, the strongest person in the room is not the one who wins the argument. It is the one who knows the argument is not worth having. Because true control has never been about raising your voice. It is about raising your standard. And when you do that, quietly, consistently, and without apology, everything else learns to meet you there, or it falls away. There is something haunting about silence. Not the awkward kind that lingers between strangers, but the profound stillness that follows an expectation of chaos. The silence that meets disrespect, betrayal, or manipulation not with anger or retaliation, but with calm. That silence says more than any outburst ever could. It leaves a space, And in that space, people begin to write their own stories. They fill the void with their guilt, their fear, their regret. They start to hear echoes of things you never said, but they know you could have. When someone wrongs you, they expect drama. They brace for arguments, long text messages, emotional monologues. They want to keep you in a theater where they still have a role to play. But when you remove yourself completely, not as a tactic, but as a decision, they are left alone on that stage, and the silence becomes a mirror, a quiet, undeniable reflection of their own actions. It forces them to sit in the very space they never expected you to create. This is the art of psychological distance. It is not a game, but a form of peacekeeping with yourself. When someone disrespects you, you withdraw. Not to punish them, but to protect yourself. Not to teach them a lesson, but to honor what you have already learned. They showed you who they were. You believed them. That is enough. And when they reach out asking, "Are we okay?" you do not lash out. You do not explain. You simply say, "We're fine." Not as an olive branch, but as quiet, firm, final closure. That is where the power lies. Not in loud exits, but in quiet detachment. Nothing disorients a person more than your refusal to perform. They expected you to fight, to cry, to plead. Instead, you left the stage. You gave them nothing. And in doing so, you gave them everything they didn't want. Space to think, room to remember, and the realization that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Stoicism teaches us not to control others, but to govern ourselves. Epictetus said, "Keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern." When someone offends you, the concern is not their behavior, but your reaction. Will you give them your fire, or will you remain grounded in your own clarity? Psychological distance gives you the space to choose, to breathe, to step back far enough to see things as they are, not through the smoke of emotion, but through the lens of truth. Carl Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But that is only possible if we do not lose ourselves trying to fix what broke us. That is the danger of staying too close. You become entangled in their stories, their moods, their distortions of reality. And before long, you forget who you were before the apology you never received. This is why distance matters. Not as punishment, but as remembrance. A return to the clarity you possessed before you started carrying someone else's confusion. It does not mean shutting everyone out. It means recognizing who makes you forget your own peace and choosing to revoke their access. It means realizing that your energy is a currency, and some people are reckless with it. They take, and then grow angry when the supply runs out. But you are not a resource for the emotionally reckless. You are a human being with limits, boundaries, and depth. And distance is how you protect that. There is a strange truth to detachment. The quieter you become, the louder their conscience grows. When you stop chasing closure, they start searching for it. When you stop arguing, they start replaying everything you never said. And what they imagine will often cut deeper than anything you could have verbalized. You didn't need to scream or explain. You just stopped showing up. And in that absence, a lesson takes root, one that no conversation could have ever planted. Seneca reminded us, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." That includes being emotionally everywhere. You do not owe everyone full access to your mind, your time, your heart. If someone constantly tests your patience, withdraw your presence. If someone manipulates your kindness, stop explaining your silence. Let them learn what it's like to speak to an echo. When your distance becomes your boundary, people will either rise to meet your peace or they will fade into their own chaos. It will be tempting to fill that silence, to explain why you pulled away, to write the letter you will never send. But part of psychological strength is restraint. It is knowing that clarity does not always require conversation. Sometimes it requires letting people sit in the space they created, without rescuing them, without apologizing for the distance, and without shrinking yourself just to keep a connection alive. There is power in being the person who can walk away without drama, who chooses peace over performance, who stops giving chances just because someone asks with the right tone. You are not hard or cruel. You are simply finished entertaining versions of love or friendship that cost you your sanity. And when you embody that truth, the air around you shifts. People feel it. They don't know what changed, but they know they cannot reach you in the same way anymore. And that unsettles them more than any confrontation ever could. Because you didn't leave loudly. You didn't attack. You simply stopped participating. And that quiet retreat echoes longer than 1,000 accusations. It says, I no longer belong here. I no longer fit where I have to fight for the bare minimum. I am choosing to be where peace does not cost me my identity. Let others fill the silence with their stories. Let them assume, interpret, rewrite. It no longer matters. You have stepped out of their narrative. You have stopped trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And in doing so, you reclaim something rare. Space. Space to grow, to heal, to exist without being stretched, questioned, or diminished. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply decline the invitation to chaos. Not out of weakness, but because your peace has become too valuable to trade for noise. Walk away, not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. Because the more you honor your silence, the louder your presence will become in their memory. If this resonated with you, there is another video waiting that will take you even deeper. It is on your screen now. Watch it next. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal, where stillness is not just survival, it is strength.